Hi, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 1 in Criminal Justice Organization and Administration. We are going to look at the organization and mission of policing in the United States. So first we want to define what an organization is, and that's a group that's created to work in synergy that has a common mission or a common goal. All of law enforcement is structured as an organization whose mission is to provide the public with services. So let's talk about some early theorists and people trying to explain or create the foundation of a definition for the organization. And we'll start with Sir Robert Peel, who argued that there was a need for a formal organization of policing. And that formal organization of policing must be stable, efficient, and organized as in a military capacity. Next is Max Weber. He's German. That W is pronounced as a V. It's not Max Weber, it's Max Weber. He's a German sociologist, and he advocated for a bureaucracy and a hierarchical organization that had distinct roles, specialization of labor, and tasks as the way to successfully achieve the organization's mission. And finally, we're going to talk about Frederick Taylor, who was an industrial engineer. And he argued for a chain of command, a tall hierarchy, and centralized decision making similar to modern military organizations. Formal police organizations are going to require at least three things. So first, we've already talked about a clear mission statement that guides the philosophies and the values of the organization. Second is going to be a clear division of labor among the employees. And third is going to be a hierarchy of authority. And all of these elements work in tandem to reach the desired goals and outcomes of the organization. So what is a mission statement? A mission statement is going to be an explanation of why an organization exists and where and how that organization is going to focus its energy and resources. What is the guiding philosophy? This is going to be the values that are honored and practiced by that organization. And both of these things, the guiding philosophy and the mission statement, are going to drive the organization. So there's a division of labor in law enforcement. And I want to talk first about field operations. Field operations are going to be your uniformed officers. It's going to be your officers who are on patrol, who work in narcotics, in investigations, etc. These are going to be your line personnel that directly have the front line of looking to accomplish the goal of that department. We also have support services, which are frequently advisory or informational in nature. They provide support services to line personnel and to administration. So things such as recruitment or training, record keeping, planning and research, etc. I like to know that law enforcement is quasi-militaristic, and what that means, quasi, it means like semi. It is not completely militaristic, but it is semi-militaristic in that it's organized according to rank and it's organized according to a chain of command, just as the military is. So what is that chain of command or that order of authority? So I like to tell people to think of this as a pyramid, where at the very top you have your top law enforcement officer, the chief of police or the sheriff is at the very top. And then there's different layers all the way down until you get to the bottom, which is going to be personnel and line staff. And in between there are going to be different ranks of authority. The point of this is for communication and control of information and control of response to information. That with each layer, the person above you in the layer above you is who you reach out to when there's a problem or a conflict. You can't be a line personnel officer, a patrol officer at the very bottom, and have a problem, a conflict, a concern, and jump all the way to the top of the hierarchy and talk to the chief of police. You would need to go to the next level in the chain of command above you. If it can't be resolved there, the issue continues to work its way up the ladder until it can be resolved. So let's talk about unity of command. So this goes hand in hand with chain of command, and unity of command is that immediate supervisor, which is your first point of contact when there's an issue and when there's ever any sort of communication. So your immediate supervisor, that's who you go to. You can't skip over that person and go to their supervisor, etc. You have to go to that immediate command. Span of control is going to define how many individuals are under the supervisor's control. This is going to be dictated by the size of the department and how much crime there is in a given area, right? Obviously, the more crime there is, the more officers you're going to have, bigger department you're going to have, and there's going to be a greater span of control. We have in recent decades seen a change in organizational structure, and we see that a lot of policing organizations, corrections organizations, etc., are moving to become flat organizations. So rather than that pyramid with that chain of command, they're going to decentralize, and it's going to become this sort of rectangular wide span of control. Flat organizations are different in that they have fewer lieutenants, fewer captains, fewer departments, right? They're going to have more sergeants, more patrol officers. So again, if you think of that pyramid with the chief of police at the top and each, on its way down, all the way down to line officers, instead of having that big sharp pyramid and that chain of command, we're going to flatten it out, right? We're going to take out some of the higher level rank, and we're gonna create more lower level ranks and decentralize. And decentralization is the next concept we're going to talk about, and that just simply removes the authority from those higher up positions. The captains behind the desks, the chief of police, right? We're going to take some of that original authority that was at the top of the pyramid, and we're going to bring it down to the lower ranks, and we're going to give the lower ranks more authority and more responsibility, more autonomy, right? Why do we do this? Because the people at the very bottom of that original pyramid, the line staff, the patrol officers, the sergeants, etc., they're the ones who are out in the street actually executing the job. So they have their finger on the pulse of what's currently happening, where the problems really lie, what approaches aren't working, what approaches are working. And that's the idea behind the flat organization and decentralization, is giving more decision making and autonomy and power to the lower areas of the ranks, because they are the front line and they are the ones dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so along with decentralization, we also have different policing approaches and philosophies. So we're going to start with Old Faithful, which is community policing. Community policing has a heavy presence of officers specifically on foot patrol. You've probably heard of Officer Friendly, who is sort of like the poster child for community police. But they're out on foot patrol, getting to know the community, working actively in the community, making relationships in the community, so that there is a give and take between the community and law enforcement to identify problems when they start, and to talk about and come up with responses to mitigate these problems in tandem with the community. I want you to be aware, and I want to contrast community policing with broken windows policing. This is a theory that was authored by Wilson and Kelling, and they came out with a sort of novel approach to explaining crime. And their thought was, the idea behind broken windows was originally you'd see areas that are run down that have a lot of crime. And in those areas, you always saw broken windows, right? Or graffiti, or broken down cars that nobody fixed or moved. And they argued that this was a proxy, this is an identifier, that if you're in a geographic locale where people start breaking windows and vandalizing, and nobody takes the steps to fix those windows, to clean up that graffiti, to stop those quality of life crimes before they become violent crimes, before they become systemic crime. If you don't do that, those very small crimes will grow and grow and grow, because the people committing those very small crimes, the vandalism, the graffiti, the low-level drug dealing, the prostitution, will see, okay, well, there's no law enforcement in this area, so we can take these low-level crimes and, we can push the boundaries a little bit. We can go farther and farther. And what Wilson and Kelling argue through Broken Windows is that if you don't enforce those quality of life crimes, if you don't stop them when they start, the area will spiral out of control and begin to decay. Contrast that with a neighborhood where you see a broken window and it's fixed in a day. They would argue that that community is engaged, they care about the environment, the safety, the appearance of the neighborhood. They're invested, and they're going to stay on top of those quality of life issues before they spiral out of control. So I want you to understand broken windows theory. What is the difference between reactive and proactive policing? Well, reactive policing is largely what police do. They respond after a crime has already occurred. They come after the fact. But we are, and we always have been, trying to shift towards more proactive policing. And proactive policing is identifying the factors that create crime and attempting to provide solutions before the crime actually occurs, so that there isn't any crime to react to, or so that there's a much lower rate of crime to react to. So next, we're going to talk about problem-solving policing. This has an emphasis on determining the underlying causes of crime. And the idea is, let's identify the underlying causes and seek to identify solutions to solve them. CompStat policing is another very popular approach to policing, policing du jour in big cities right now. And this is computer comparison statistics. And what they do is they gather the crime data month in and month out. So each month, officers are going to report, how much crime happened? What kind of crime? Was it violent crime? Was it drug crime? Where did it happen? And then they're going to look month to month at this data review and see, did drug crimes increase, in this month compared to the last three? Did it decrease? If it did decrease, what kind of law enforcement approach have we deployed there that appears to be working? If in this area we see violent crime is on the rise, well, what's going on there and why is it on the rise? And then they're going to use that to nip and tuck the deployment of their resources. So obviously areas with greater crime are going to get more attention from the data-driven in CompStat. Next is intelligence-led policing. This is a very proactive policing approach. This is supposed to prevent and detect and disrupt crime through intelligence and information sharing. Data analysis married with intelligence and information sharing, whether it's obtained through confidential informants or what have you, they're going to marry those two approaches to say, okay, what is the best way to deploy our resources to prevent crime before it happens? So that's intelligence-led policing. Next is evidence-based policing. Evidence-based policing is very, very hot. It's the sexy thing in law enforcement right now. And evidence-based policing is going to be an approach with empirical research, literal number crunching, right? In a given area, how many violent crimes do we have? How many drug crimes do we have, vice crimes, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're going to say, okay, let's propose this policy response, right? Let's propose, a mandatory arrest for domestic violence in a given area and see if it has an effect, see if it minimizes domestic violence. That's going to be evidence-based policing. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this new policy of trying to minimize domestic violence in a given geographic locale by mandatory arrest for both parties. And we're going to do this for 6 months, and we're going to look at the 6 months before we put the policy in, see what the rates of domestic violence were, and then we're going to look at the 6 months when we implemented the policy and see what the domestic violence rates were. Do we see an increase? Do we see a decrease? If we see a decrease, it looks like our policy approach is working, right? That's evidence-based policing. So you can come out and say, hey, we have evidence that this policy works and it decreases domestic violence. So let's take it from this city and let's put it in all cities because we're having success with it. Conversely, you might look at it and say, okay, we implemented this policy for domestic violence for 6 months, and not only did we not see a decrease in domestic violence, we actually saw an increase, which means it's clearly not working. So now we have evidence that this policy approach is a failure, and it's a waste of time, money, and resources. So let's move on from it and try something else. That's evidence-based policing. Finally, we have the concept of predictive policing. This is, again, going to be research-based. It's going to be data-based. And the idea here is that if you can gather enough data and you can gather enough research of crime over in a given locale over a large period of time, that eventually one day we'll be able to make algorithms that can predict what crime is going to occur, where, what kind of crime, and that will give us an identification factor of what kind of a law enforcement response do we need to stop it before it starts or to react appropriately. We're not there yet, but certainly as we've seen with the tech world, algorithms are incredibly powerful in terms of identifying patterns and predicting behaviors. It's very possible that we could be there someday.